I never thought a cup of coffee could change someone's life. Not really. Sure, you hear those saccharine stories about random acts of kindness, about how someone paid for the person behind them in the drive-thru, and somehow it sparked a chain reaction of goodwill that made the evening news. But that wasn't my story. My moment wasn't caught on camera. It didn't go viral. It didn't even make it to social media. But it saved me, and I mean that in the most literal sense possible. It was February 2019, and Chicago was in the grip of what the newspapers were calling a polar apocalypse. The kind of cold that makes your teeth ache and your lungs burn with each breath. The kind of cold that turns your fingers blue, even through 2 pairs of gloves. I'd been walking for hours, though I couldn't have told you why if you'd asked me. My mind was as numb as my extremities, cycling through the same toxic thoughts that had been my constant companions for the past year. The rejection letter from the residency program had been the final straw. I'd spent 8 years of my life, 8 years of crushing debt, sleepless nights, and sacrificed relationships, pursuing my dream of becoming a surgeon. My grades had been excellent. My MCAT scores were well above average. But somehow, it wasn't enough. I'd been waitlisted at 3 programs and outright rejected by the rest. And now, standing there in the brutal Chicago winter, I couldn't see a way forward. The coffee shop's warmth hit me like a physical force when I stumbled inside, more to escape the cold than anything else. The place was nearly empty, unsurprising given that it was almost closing time. Behind the counter, a woman with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a messy bun was wiping down the espresso machine. She looked up when I entered, and something in her expression changed. I must have been quite a sight, red-faced from the cold, eyes swollen from crying, probably looking like I'd been dragged backward through a hedge. I ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a small black coffee, and fumbled with my wallet, my fingers still half frozen. That's when I realized my credit card was declined. Of course it was. I'd maxed it out paying for my last round of applications. "I'm sorry," I mumbled, already turning to leave. "Never mind." "Honey," the woman called after me. "Wait a minute." I paused, one hand on the door handle, the warm air of the coffee shop already slipping away from me. The woman, her name tag read Margaret, was already moving around the counter, carrying not just a coffee but a plate with what looked like a grilled cheese sandwich. "Sit down," she said, in a tone that brooked no argument. She reminded me of my mother, who'd passed away during my 2nd year of medical school. Maybe that's why I found myself obeying, sinking into one of the oversized armchairs near the fireplace. Margaret set the food and coffee down in front of me, and then, to my surprise, sat in the chair opposite. She didn't say anything at first, just watched me with kind eyes as I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. "When was the last time you ate something?" she asked finally. I had to think about it. "Yesterday. Maybe." She nudged the plate closer. "Eat." I took a bite of the sandwich and suddenly realized I was starving. As I ate, Margaret started talking. Not about me, or what was obviously wrong, but about her day. About the regular who always ordered the same complicated drink and never tipped. About the new barista who kept burning the espresso. About her grandson's first piano recital. Her voice was warm and soothing, filling the empty space between us with comfortable noise. When I finished eating, she leaned forward. "Now," she said, "want to tell me what's got you walking around and whether that would make a polar bear think twice?" Maybe it was her kindness. Maybe it was the fact that she reminded me of my mother. Maybe it was just that I'd finally reached my breaking point. Whatever the reason, I found myself telling her everything. The dreams of medical school since I was a child, watching my father die of a treatable condition because we couldn't afford proper medical care. The years of study, of sacrifice, the crushing weight of student loans, the rejections, the feeling that I'd failed not just myself, but the memory of both my parents. Margaret listened without interrupting, her eyes never leaving my face. When I finally ran out of words, she was quiet for a long moment. "My husband was a surgeon," she said finally. 30 years at Chicago General. Want to know how many times he was rejected from residency programs? I nodded. 5 times. 5 different years. He worked as a lab tech, saved up money, improved his applications, and kept trying. The 6th time, he got in. Went on to become one of the top cardiothoracic surgeons in the Midwest. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. You know what the difference was between the 5th rejection and the 6th acceptance? I shook my head. Nothing. Nothing except that he didn't give up. The world needs good doctors, honey. More importantly, it needs doctors who care enough to keep trying even when it seems impossible. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card, slightly bent at the corners. This is my husband's old partner. He's on the residency committee at Northwestern now. Tell him Maggie sent you. He owes me about 1,000 favors, and I'm calling one in. I stared at the card in my hand, hardly daring to breathe. I don't know what to say. Say you'll try again, she said simply. That's all anyone can ask. I did try again. Dr. Harrison, Margaret's contact, turned out to be not just on the residency committee but the chair of it. He looked at my application personally, noted some areas where I could strengthen it, and helped me revise my personal statement. The following year, I was accepted into Northwestern's surgical residency program. That was 5 years ago. Today, I'm in my final year of residency, specializing in pediatric surgery. Every morning, on my way to the hospital, I stop at Margaret's coffee shop. She's still there, still serving coffee and kindness in equal measure. She still won't let me pay for my coffee, though I've tried countless times. Instead, we established a different kind of payment system. For every free coffee she gives me, I provide free medical consultation to someone who needs it at the free clinic where I volunteer. Sometimes, when I'm operating on a child, helping to fix what's broken and make them whole again, I think about that night. About how close I came to giving up everything. About how a simple cup of coffee and a grilled cheese sandwich, offered with kindness and without judgment, changed the entire course of my life. I've learned that kindness isn't always about grand gestures or life-changing moments. Sometimes it's just about being there, about seeing someone's pain and not looking away. Sometimes it's about offering what you have, even if what you have is just coffee and a sandwich and a willing ear. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything. Last week, I saw a young woman come into Margaret's shop just before closing. She had that same lost look I must have had 5 years ago. I watched as Margaret did what she always does, offered coffee, food, and kindness without question or expectation. I watched as the woman's shoulders gradually relaxed, as she began to talk, as the weight she was carrying began to lift ever so slightly. I don't know that woman's story. I don't know if Margaret's kindness changed her life the way it changed mine. But I do know this. Kindness creates ripples that extend far beyond the initial moment of giving. Every life I touch as a surgeon, every child I help heal, every family I can comfort, they are all part of the ripple effect that started with a cup of coffee on a cold Chicago night. People often ask me why I became a surgeon. I tell them different versions of the truth, depending on who's asking. Sometimes I talk about my father, about wanting to prevent other families from experiencing what mine did. Sometimes I talk about the intellectual challenge, the precision required, the satisfaction of fixing what's broken. But the complete truth is this. I became a surgeon because a coffee shop owner named Margaret showed me kindness when I needed it most. And in doing so, she taught me the most important lesson in medicine, that sometimes the smallest gestures can have the most profound healing effect. I keep the business card she gave me that night in my wallet, even though the edges are worn and the text is barely legible now. It's my reminder that life can change in an instant, that hope can appear in the most unexpected places, and that kindness, real, genuine, unconditional kindness, has the power to alter the course of a life. These days, whenever I see someone struggling, whether it's a patient's family in the hospital waiting room or a stranger on the street, I think of Margaret. I think of how she saw past my frozen exterior to the pain underneath, how she offered help without being asked, how she changed my life without expecting anything in return. And I try to do the same for others, to pass on the kindness that was shown to me. Because that's the thing about kindness, it grows. It multiplies. It spreads from person to person, moment to moment, creating a web of connection and compassion that can hold us all up when we're falling. Margaret taught me that. She taught me that sometimes, all it takes to save a life is a cup of coffee and the courage to care. I'm a surgeon now, and I save lives in the operating room every day. But I never forget that my own life was saved first, not with a scalpel or sutures, but with a simple act of kindness from a stranger who chose to care. That's the power of kindness. It doesn't just change moments, it changes lives. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, it changes the lives of countless others in turn. Margaret still won't let me pay for my coffee. But every time I operate on a child who couldn't afford care otherwise, every time I mentor a struggling medical student, every time I stop to help someone who looks as lost as I once did, I'm paying it forward. Because that's what kindness does. It creates an endless chain of positive change, reaching far beyond what we can see or know. And sometimes, late at night when I'm doing rounds in the pediatric ward, I think about how close I came to giving up. I think about how different my life would be, how different my patients' lives would be, if Margaret hadn't been there that night. If she hadn't taken the time to care, to listen, to help. And I'm reminded that we never really know the full impact of our actions, how a simple gesture of kindness might ripple out into the world in ways we can't imagine. That's why I tell this story. Not because it's extraordinary. There are countless stories of kindness happening every day, most of them never told. I tell it because it reminds us that we all have the power to change lives, often in the simplest of ways. We just have to be willing to see the pain in others, to reach out to care. Margaret taught me that lesson over a cup of coffee and a grilled cheese sandwich. Now, I'm trying to teach it to others, one patient, one student, one moment of kindness at a time. Because sometimes, that's all it takes to change a life. Sometimes, that's all it takes to save one. And in the end, isn't that what we're all here for? To help each other through the cold nights, to offer warmth when we can, to be the light that helps guide someone else home. I think it is. I know it is. Margaret showed me that, and I'll spend the rest of my life showing others, one small act of kindness at a time. The coffee shop is still there, still open late, still a beacon of warmth in the cold Chicago nights. And Margaret is still there too, still serving coffee and kindness to anyone who needs it. If you're ever in Chicago, stop by. Order a coffee. Stay a while. You never know. You might just witness a life being changed, one cup of coffee at a time. Because that's the thing about kindness. It doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. It doesn't always make the evening news or go viral on social media. Sometimes it's quiet, simple, understated. But its power to change lives, to save lives, is anything but small. I know this because I lived it. Because a stranger's kindness changed my life. Because a cup of coffee and a grilled cheese sandwich were the beginning of everything I am today. And because every day, in my own way, I try to do the same for others. That's the real power of kindness. It never ends with just one act, one moment, one life changed. It keeps going, spreading, growing, touching life after life after life. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to be part of that chain, that endless ripple of compassion and care that makes the world a little bit better, one small act at a time. I still don't know if I ever properly thanked Margaret for what she did that night. Words seem inadequate to express the depth of my gratitude. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the best way to thank someone for kindness is to pass it on, to keep the chain going, to be for others what they were for you. So that's what I do. Every day, in every way I can, I try to be someone's Margaret. Because you never know when a simple act of kindness might save a life. You never know when a cup of coffee might change everything. And isn't that a beautiful thing to believe in?